All right, so thank you everyone for coming and hearing the presentation about From the Mountains to the Sea, the historic restoration of the Penobscot River. I'm John, the director here, if anyone doesn't know. And Miranda over here had the idea for this presentation. We had a very good presentation last year about the Atlantic salmon and their relevance to this area and to the river. So we thought it would be a good idea to have another presentation. And it's a good day to have it because tomorrow is actually Endangered Species Day, which the Atlantic salmon, which you can see right beside Janie there, she gets a good view, are an endangered species and they live here locally. These ones will be released tomorrow, Pete, into the river, and they'll hopefully get to Greenland and then hopefully come back, though the chances are slim that any one will make it. Some of them will.
How are you going to feel, John, when they come back and they want to spawn in the library here?
Yeah, I don't know. They'll just like jump into the. Yeah.
Today they could go up the street pretty easily, though.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for a flood. So that's all I have. Thank you guys for coming, and we're excited to hear about it.
I'm excited about your shirt.
Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Laura Roseday, and I had the privilege of being the executive director of the Penobscot River Restoration Trust, which was the group that implemented the project that has happened in the lower river. And I'm one of the people who is going to help share the stories from this book, From the Mountains to the Sea. And I've been at many releases of salmon from the Fish Friends program. And it's really, if you ever get a chance to go on one, it's really fantastic. It makes such an impression on the usually students at schools of different ages who see those fish swim away and really feel that connection and start realizing that it's really pretty miraculous what these fish do and where they go and come back to where we call home. So. And I'm actually doing one of those on the Kennebec River on Monday, so it's exciting to see your guys there. So I just want to talk a little bit about From the Mountains to the Sea. Just the concept of this book was that when a project like the Penobscot project happens, so opening a big stretch of river through some pretty major actions, ones that there were significant actions that were taken when dams were put in. And when we take them out, equally big things happen to the river, and of course we're going to talk about those positive things. But few people really get to hear the stories about what it takes actually to get that to happen. You kind of see a headline here or there, or there's a town meeting, but you don't really get to hear about all the discussions along the way. And a decade's worth, it's a lot. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share. We're just very few of the people who have these stories to share, so we're honored to be here to chat with you. So I've introduced myself, and I'd like to introduce Chuck Loring. Chuck is the Natural Resources Director for the Penobscot Indian Nation. So you all probably know that his offices are located on Indian Island, and then Andy Good is with the Atlantic Salmon Federation, and he's their VP for American U.S. programs, right? Close enough?
Close enough.
Close enough. And Andy's organization was one of the members of the Penobscot River Restoration Trust, and it was led by the tribe. And then Josh Royt is with the Nature Conservancy in Maine, but also is the chair of World Fish Migration Day Foundation. And I'm going to leave it to him to talk about that. But what I'd like to tie back about World Fish Migration Day, which is May 25th, is that the Penobscot Project has inspired a lot of projects around the world. And Josh has been part of a lot of those. So I'm going to leave that to him. And we're going to share our stories in part by reading this book, which is why we're here at the library. So first I'm going to turn to Chuck to share his passage and also to tell us a little bit about why he chose it.
So I chose this passage more or less because it talked about the man that I took the position over after, John Banks, who was our natural resource director and a big part of this group. You know, kind of riding his coattails when it comes in on some of these projects, but it's very humbling to be able to, you know, sit down next to Andy and Laura and Joshua and other folks here. So I'll just read my passage, and I don't want to explain too much of it because I think, you know, it kind of takes away from it. So, all right. By summer 2003, the Maine Audubon had joined the partnership, contributing expertise on what was needed to restore the river's habitats for aquatic birds. Strong annual runs of migratory fish would help birds such as herons, mergansers, osprey, bald eagles, and kingfishers, as well as other animals such as mussels, mink, and otters to thrive as well. Negotiations among partners and with PPL were still confidential. Terms of the agreement were close to being finalized, but important questions remained. How long would it take to raise the funds to first purchase the dams and then later remove them? During the time between purchase and removal, who would take ownership of the dams? During that time, could they continue to operate the dams and generate revenue towards the removal phase? There was no entity that wanted that kind of responsibility, referring to the ownership of the dams, Kreisman says. One of the state or federal agencies would have been better insulated from liability, but no one was willing to individually take on dam ownership. The partners began to consider some form of joint ownership and what kind of entity that they would need to create to manage that responsibility. They also dug more deeply into the permitting processes that they would need to complete in order to operate the dams, and when the funds were available, remove them. Conversations among the negotiating entities were becoming increasingly technical and at times contentious as attorneys worked to craft the exact language of an agreement. At one meeting, when tensions were running particularly high, an event occurred that became a touchstone over the remaining decade of the project. Representatives of the partner organizations had spent countless hours sitting around a table trying to hash out specific terms for an agreement. Each of the negotiators were deeply committed to finding a solution. But during the lengthy discussions of seemingly minute details that were essential for the legal document, it felt at times as they were working cross purposes. Tensions flared. As a Penobscot Nation's representative at the negotiating table, Banks was becoming concerned. He decided to try something old. At the start of the meeting, I asked for some time. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, he recalls. He stood holding an eagle feather and began to walk around the table, slowly touching the feather to everyone's shoulder. One by one, at each person, he paused, spoke a few words about the larger meaning of what the group was trying to accomplish. I just wanted to remind people that this wasn't about us. We were speaking for the eagles, the otters, the fish, and all the critters that rely on the river. We were here for all of our relatives and our entire history. This was so much bigger than us. I just wanted to make sure that when tensions ran high, everyone remembered that. The mood in the room had shifted completely by the time Banks took his seat again. The shift carried through for years to come. For many, even those who had not been present that day at the meeting with the eagle feather was deeply meaningful. They reflected on it frequently as a reminder of why they were committed to the project despite the challenges.
Thank you, Chuck. I was at that meeting, and that really captures it well. It was pretty powerful when John did that, and people who, like the book says, were really adamantly opposed and were throwing up roadblocks every step of the way. They recalled that moment themselves as a turning point for them, so it was an honor to be there. So the next reading is me, and if you have a book, you'll find it on page 68. And I chose it basically because one of my favorite things about doing this work is meeting the people who are involved in restoring a river and and that's kind of everybody, you know? You realize that you become connected to just, you know, everyone in an area around it, and it's frankly, it's fun, even when it's hard. It's meaningful work. When people's fears came up around the project, we needed to determine whether they were founded, and if so, how to best address them. Rose Day, me says. Sometimes we had to ask people if they could accept some downside of the project in context of the greater good. And honestly, this happened a lot. People went a great distance to accept these changes. Rose Day recalls a conversation that happened shortly after the project was publicly announced, and when she was talking with people in a neighborhood around the VZ Dam. Was the closest dam to the ocean. And also the largest dam at about a little shy of 22 feet. There was one house in particular that overlooked the dam. Barbara Wilson answered the door and invited me in. We walked into the kitchen where there was a table against the big window, and the dam was literally right there. While Rose Day sat looking out over the dam, Leonard Wilson brought out lemonade and cookies. Returning to the table, she grew very quiet for a minute, Rose Day says. Then she nodded toward the water spilling over the dam and said, "You know what my grandkids call that? Grandma's waterfall." By Rose Day's account, there was no real reason for this woman to be for this project. She liked things the way they were, but she learned about what we were doing and why. We got to know each other quite well over the years. A few years after their initial meeting, Rose Day received a check. The note attached explained that this was a donation on behalf of her grandson, who was on a local Envirothon team. The donation was his Christmas gift from his grandmother. When you listen to people, you can move out of an us against them mindset, Rose Day offers. I believe most people who disagreed with us respected us. I never said no to anyone who wanted to talk about the project. I treated people the way I treat my neighbors. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I know that just listening today that Miranda's gotten to know a lot of people in this community too, and many others. So that I think is a really there are many stories like that in this book and otherwise. So thanks for listening.
I think I'm up next.
You're up next.
And I've chose to talk or read a passage about recognizing the downside of dams. And I chose it because the Penobscot really for the last few hundred years was managed as an industrial river. I mean, it was probably in the late 1700s and the 1800s. The tributaries all got a lot of dams on them to power various mills. But then once the technology developed a little bit, the engineering technology, the main stem started being dammed in that sort of the early to mid 1800s were the real sort of go-go days for dam building. And since that time, the river really had been managed or has been managed as an industrial river. And so when we came along, we were really just seeking a balance. We were never about taking out all the dams. We're still not about taking out all the dams, but trying to find a balance in the river between economic use, recreational use, fisheries and river health, and cultural traditions as well. So that's what we've been about. However, I still think and it doesn't have to do with that, but it was following some recent Facebook posts on another project in another part of the state, that's talking about a dam removal, and people say, well, you don't need to remove the dam, we just need to build a fishway. Fishways are fine, and there's a lot of misconceptions about fishways. So this touches a little bit about that. But one thing I wanted to add before I start reading it is that when you look at a dam, you have to consider that each dam is 2 passages. So if you have like 3 dams in a river, you say, well, we just, it's 3 dam passages. Well, really it's 6 dam passages because, in the Penobscot we have 11 and 12 different species of migratory fish. All of them, except for one, which are sea lampreys, they come up and spawn and they go back out to the ocean. So they've got to come back downriver over those dams, which present a whole suite of problems. And then the juveniles, when they get to a certain size, they have to come downriver also. So we're really looking at 2 dam passages for the most part with these species. So it's worth keeping in mind. Historically, the biggest threat to salmon has been dams. Unlike some of the other fish that can spawn in warmer water or down in the lower river, salmon need to get much farther upstream into the cold headwaters with clean gravelly stones where they can dig their redds. Into the 20th century, the dams built on the main stem of the Penobscot River produced real benefits for people by generating energy and jobs. Local residents enjoyed the boating, fishing, and scenery of some of these man-made lakes. However, an inescapable reality of any dam that spans an entire river, however, is that it blocks fish from swimming upstream. Any constriction in a river, be it a dam, a dysfunctional culvert, or a natural set of falls, can cause fish to die going upriver or moving back down, says the Maine Department of Marine Resources. If their fish passage is blocked or delayed by multiple dam passages, salmon may not reproduce, or they will spawn in habitat where eggs and young fry have little chance of survival. When these dams were built, they wiped out populations of fish like American shad and alewives from most of the river, says river advocate Doug Watts. People who lived above the dams lost a resource, but worse than that, over time they lost all memory of these fish. The story changed from, we don't see shad here anymore, to, there are no shad in the Penobscot. When I talk to people about bringing shad back to the upper watershed, some of them don't even know what a shad is. It's hard to make a case for restoring a species that we have no collective memory of. That's what gets lost when we block the river. In many places, both in Maine and beyond, people have sought to reduce the impact of dams by building fishways, structures intended to allow fish to pass around barriers. But it's not easy to build fishways that work reliably for one or multiple species. For example, the speed of water moving through a fish passage must be great enough to attract the fish, but not so strong that it washes fish back downstream or exhausts them. And each of the species has its own needs and preferences for water velocities. According to the 1989 New York Times article about salmon, even the most sophisticated fish ladders will enable no more than 80 to 90% of the salmon to move upstream, and at each upriver dam the attrition continues. In addition to this, significant numbers of smolt, young salmon headed downriver to the sea, are killed when they pass over dams and hit the ledges or get turned around or go through turbines. The Natural Resources Council of Maine reports it's extremely difficult for fish to get over multiple dams, even when the dams have fish passage structures installed. That's true for both upstream and downstream migrations. Penobscot River still has the largest Atlantic salmon population in the United States, although the numbers are frighteningly low compared to historic runs. The National Academy of Sciences called Restoring Habitat and Fish Passage on the Penobscot the last best chance for recovery of Atlantic salmon in the United States. One truism of nature and ecosystems, however, is that nothing exists in isolation. When one species falters, the fabric of an entire ecosystem stretches and strains. Sometimes it tears. Atlantic salmon recovery in the Penobscot may only be possible if species like American shad, alewife, blueback herring, and rainbow smelt that they co-evolve with and are dependent on are well established, according to NOAA. Rainbow smelt are a food source for salmon. Sea lamprey build their nests in the same areas that salmon also lay their eggs. They move stones and clean them, which improves spawning habitat for the salmon. Trout Unlimited agrees. You can't just restore Atlantic salmon without river herring and shad. Single species restoration has never worked in this country. You can't bring back one without the others. And in order to restore Atlantic salmon, at least one big river in Maine has to work for them and for the species they evolved with.
Thanks, Andy. It was interesting starting out with that great quote from Doug Watts about what's lost when people don't remember anymore. It's like the first and the second death in like Buddhism. The first death is the person gone. The second is when people don't remember that person anymore. Who's that guy on that stone? I don't know. Yeah. It's shifting baseline too. We just adjust to the new lower level at certain times. This has a lot of metaphors in life. This chapter that I'm going to read speaks to me as a conservation scientist because I'm always asked, one, what are we trying to restore? What shape is now? And what do we expect in the future? And that's all relying on data. And I'm super data hungry person, but I think society is in general. And this talks about how things change with restoration. This is a story that sort of reverberates around the world, like Laura was saying. It's people around the world, when they hear about the recovery of the Penobscot, it gets them excited, it gives them hope and inspiration. That's what we need, are inspired people so they learn more and act. So this is called Tremendous Increases in Fish Numbers. A year after the VZ Dam removal, Dan Cosniers, the Water Resources Program Manager for the Penobscot Nation, saw something very unusual in the river. He was collecting water samples and monitoring the abundance of mayflies and other insects that spend the early part of the year underwater in the riverbed. Because of the specific environmental requirements of these aquatic insects, they're excellent indicators of water quality. As his boat traveled along the river near Orono, Kuznir hears a splash to his right. There, off on the starboard side, were 2 seals following fish upstream. There had been no seals observed in the Orono township for nearly 200 years. Even if sea-run fish had been present in large enough numbers there to draw them to the estuary, seals would never make it past the dam in Vesey. The fishway was not designed to pass marine mammals. Before long, seal sightings were reported along the Bangor waterfront. The charismatic creatures were curious for onlookers and media attention, but it wasn't so much that the seals excited researchers like Kuznir's, it was the fact that seals were there after all and what they were after. Their presence indicated increased fish populations. Upstream from the Orono Dam, data collected at the Milford Dam fish lift confirmed what the seals hinted at. Since the dam was removed, some of the fish species targeted for restoration were moving upriver in greater numbers. In 2012, only several hundred river herring had been counted at the Vesey Dam. But in 2014, this is 2 years after that first dam removal, and 1 year after the second dam removal, the numbers soared to 180,000. These were counted at the Milford Fish Lift. Just 4 years later, in 2018, more than 2 million river herring passed through the Milford Lift, including the river herring ascending up Blackman Stream and Orono Dam. Both also were found upstream of the Vesey Dam, where there were 2.8 million fish, where less than a decade ago there were virtually none. And I've got today's updates on a sheet of paper right here in just a minute. Even these numbers are expected to continue to climb, says Penobscot Nation fish passage specialist Dan McCaw, as we continue to do projects upstream and reconnect the river with lakes and spawning habitat. Exciting news, and that was just the beginning when this book was published.
And it's been half a decade since, and you're about to tell us what's happened.
So, it's really exciting. You might not be able to see these graphs, but I printed a couple so you can hand some up the right side of the room and the left side of the room. But sometimes pictures say 100 words. But as of today, there were 2 million fish going up the Penobscot. We're just at the beginning of the migration. This just started a few weeks ago. At the end of last year's migration season, there were 6 million fish, the largest run of river herring in their entire range from the Gulf of Mexico to Labrador. Fascinating, and we have that right here in the Penobscot River, and we don't have to pay anything for it. We're not seeding fish anymore. We're not feeding them. They just come and reproduce up these streams and come back every year. One of the things that John Waldman said in his book Running Silver, which I have here, a really good one to read, is if you have 2 million or 6 million or 100 million fish coming up your river every year, and that's something society depends on and all the nature requires on, what culture would shut that off completely? I don't know.
When you consider the harvest that used to go on in the Penobscot before these dams, I mean, they used to harvest, hundreds of thousands and millions of, sustainably, because it would come back, of shad and salmon and all sorts of things. But then with the dams, it shut it off very quickly.
And the reality is that when dams were put in, almost every one, you also find a record of people objecting to that change at that time.
Yeah.
So, change goes in both directions.
In the
So-
Kennebec, they harvest somewhere around half the run every year, and it keeps going. Amazing.
So now we're going to turn to, I have a couple of questions for the other panelists, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about those, and then we're going to open it up to whatever discussion people would like to have or questions you might have. So, Chuck, if we could start with you, what aspect or moment of when the Penobscot project was happening, when do you relate to the most?
I think, I remember kind of going over, I think it was Great Works, my boss talked me into taking the morning off and going over when they did, started the removal there, and they had a little ceremony and stuff, and I remember, seeing Butch speak, think he gave some ceremony there at the beginning, maybe. I think I'm remembering all this right. It was a while ago.
Sounds right so far.
And I just remember how moving it was
2012.
to see all that happen. To see the equipment going down in the river. There you
A
go.
t-shirt for me, yeah.
I got a T-shirt out of the deal.
Just to be able to see, see the dam start to come out. And then not too long after that, there were some news articles that came out, and one of my good friends, Hugadano, was paddling a birch bark canoe. I think that was in front of Easy, I believe.
Mhm.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, it's just, seeing all that stuff in the news was really, really moving, I think, just to see, people that I respected in the community and grew up around, and just thought very highly of, and John and Chief, obviously,
Mhm. Yeah.
so, yeah, I think that was probably, and now, just seeing the stripers come back, that's my favorite thing. That's definitely a little perk to the whole deal, but yeah.
Andy?
Repeat that question, please.
Just one of the moments that was most special to you, that you remember had an impact on you during the project.
Okay. I might pass that to Josh, so let me just give that a
Well,
little thought.
give it some thought, because
Well,
I.
I've already got it.
Okay. All right. That's all you needed to do was let go for a second.
Well, because once the project, we signed a 5-year option to purchase these dams, and it took us all of 5 years to raise the funds. And then it took, between the permitting and raising the funds and all the need to take them out, it took another, 5+ years. So it took a long time, as these projects do. I mean, the Edwards Dam on the Kennebec, that was a 10-year project also. But once we knew that we were moving forward, that this project was going to happen, some things still had to fall in the right place, we started working in the tributaries, because the Penobscot project was really aimed quite a bit at the main stem of the river, opening up that highway. But still, the arteries, so to speak, a lot of these tributaries had a lot of old mill dams, lake outlet dams, and I don't think any of them had a fishway, no matter where you went in this big old watershed. And so we started working in the tributaries to open up some of these key tributaries, not just every one, but we would work with the agencies, the state and federal agencies, what are the key tributaries, what are the key cold water tributaries, what are the key warm water tributaries, where are the ponds and lakes that we can open up for alewives and things like that. So we started doing that. So by the time these dams were removed, one of the reasons you saw jumps in these fish populations as quickly as you did, in that we had opened up things like Blackman Stream, and Maine Department of Marine Resources had taken some alewives from Orland, and moved them up into into Blackman Stream, and so to give things a jump start. So the pump was sort of primed, and so. Well, I guess the thing that excited me is that we immediately started monitoring these streams. We knew that alewives, for instance, for the most part, had a 4-year generation. So if you put adults in the river, or in a pond, it'd be 4 years before you would start to see that first age class come back to spawn again. But sometimes you can get some 3-year-olds that come back. So we were there in year 3. And in Blackman Stream, and we saw 3-year-olds coming back in DMR. We documented that. So we hadn't even done the Howland project or anything like that, and we already had some of these fish starting to respond. So it really showed, if you reconnect the habitat and just let fish do the rest themselves, that it works. And so that was the early glimpse that the project was going to work, and then it's taken off from there.
Nice. Yeah, it is. It's amazing how this works, and it's amazing how quickly it works. The Kennebec inspired me a lot in seeing what was happening there right away, but it wasn't until I'd been helping out for just like 2 hours, which is plenty of work when you're doing fish lifting at VZ, and the fish would have a hard time getting into the fishway. Some that made it in the fishway would actually make it to the top and into the trap, and they'd be lifted. And there we'd work aside our DMR colleagues, one is here now. We'd put the fish in this like rubber sock, this sometimes 3-foot long fish in this rubber sock, take it out, quickly measure it, run it to somebody else. There was a plank that went up to the side cement concrete wall, and you'd run up the plank like this wide to dump it into truck quickly because the fish was stressed out. It might be a 65, 70 degree day, so we needed to get the fish in cold water again. So it was that lunacy, and it was almost like Keystone Cops. It was like, is this really how we're going to save an endangered species and move, 112,000 fish that we want here? Like, no way. This is absurd. And then it was so. The first removal was very moving. I cry easily. I was crying that day when they started drumming and eagles were soaring overhead. And also, I was born on June 11th, 1962. This was June 11th, 2012. It was my 50th birthday. And yeah, it was super moving. And I had to take tours of people, executives from the Nature Conservancy and other folks that were visiting. And we stopped at Blackman Stream. And we got down and we were looking down into Blackman Stream, and it was just black, and it was sort of like someone said, "Is that tannins in the water? It's so dark we can't even see the bottom." I said, "No, those are the backs of fish. You couldn't see the gravel. It was only this deep. You couldn't see the gravel. It was just pure dark backs of fish, and sometimes you'd see their little fins cut through the top." So that's one inspiration tied together, but in my mind, it's just that incredible inspiration and hope of seeing what can happen from these actions and the implications for the community, especially the native community that had, my introduction to the Penobscot as a water people, just like, oh, they are a river people. Like, and we don't, not to take away from that, but all these communities developing around the world around rivers, we're inspired by them. They're beautiful places and they provide value, and I feel like we all can connect to them, and we don't need to have a 12,000 year history. We can all learn something from those people that remember it. Long-winded answer. This stuff gets me riled up.
Well, so I'm going to add, because we have a couple of minutes, that for me, one of the most powerful moments was that when I started working on the Penobscot project, that was on the heels of there had been a proposal to build yet another dam on the Penobscot that would have been down close to the ocean, and a lot of people put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into keeping that from happening. And the company that proposed it pretty much admitted, as everyone had to, because they were the facts, that that would be it. For salmon, it would be a, trap what you can, truck them around, and keep it going as long as you can. And that would have been the end. And I met Butch Phillips, who did the ceremony at Great Works. And he said, it's hard for me to imagine that in my lifetime we're going to be able to fix this river. And it was a deep, deep sadness. And but he still had hope, but he, it takes a lot out of you to fight that kind of battle. And by the time the Penobscot project was over with, one of the first things that happened as a benefit was that the Penobscot Nation hosted the Whitewater National Paddling Races. And now I'm going to get choked up.
Yeah.
And on one of those days, Butch was up on he wasn't able to paddle at that time because of some health issues, but he was there and he watched his son and his granddaughter paddle under a bridge as he watched below Indian Island through waters that weren't passable until those dams were removed. And it was a pretty special moment. And the other thing that jumps out to me are in terms of looking at the backs of fish. Penobscot oral history, you hear all the time, you could walk on the backs of fish, and people think that that's exaggeration. Well, when you see it, you know that it isn't, and we're not even close to what the river can produce, so. And we could probably go on and on,
I
but
know.
we'd rather talk to you.
They're all coming.
So thanks for, Chuck, did you wanna add something?
No.
Okay, great. So, well, thanks for listening, thanks for having us here.
Thank you for being here.
If there are any questions, we would love to talk.
I would
Yeah.
just like to know, are river herring alewives? Is that what? I know
Yes.
Because I've been reading about alewife.
River herring include two species, the blueback herring and the alewife, which are really hard to tell apart. And that's one reason why we lump them together, because it's really tough to tell them apart.
And they go up the same.
They both go upstream. Alewives go to ponds to spawn, and blueback herring spawn in rivers,
Oh,
just like
okay.
American shad do, but slightly different habitat.
Thank you.
And slightly different timing in terms of their runs. Bluebacks are a little bit later, so, you know, when you think of what feeds on fish and things like that, it's, you know, all things are connected in ways that we don't know, but which we're starting to see. I mean, people who are now can observe the river, you know, you see these things, you know, they're real.
Yeah, I mean, the importance of the river herring is when they're coming upstream is when Atlantic salmon smolts are coming downstream to go to Greenland, and so they're referred to as sort of a prey buffer. So the cormorants and other things like that you used to see following the smolts downriver, now, you know, you've got a much more abundant food source in river herring, and they have they're oily fish, a very high caloric content. So the predators focus in on them and allow smolts to get out. So, you know, that's one of the things that this project is doing, is trying to reestablish a lot of these lost, you know, ecological processes, some that we're aware of and many that we're not even aware of. So it's sort of fascinating to watch over time. And then just one little anecdote about that was also really telling to me, although this was on another river where we removed a dam, but it's similar because it's the same species as this one, is that some alewives were observed coming downstream, and they ended up having these little, what look like little eels, but they're small juvenile sea lampreys. And so sea lampreys live up the river, and then eventually they come down out to the ocean. And also, but at that stage, they're called transformers, and they're not parasitic at that stage. It's only when they get to the ocean are they parasitic. And so, but they need to get to the ocean. And so they somehow can tell the difference between a sea-run fish like an alewife or a blueback herring versus like a smallmouth bass. And so these sea lampreys are attaching themselves to the alewives, getting a free ride down, and then dropping off once they get to the estuary. And those are some of the relationships we weren't even aware of that we are, you know, now aware of.
Because, yeah, you just clarified something. I always think of lampreys as parasitic because I came to the Sheepscot River once in June, and I was rowing, and they were like dripping over my oars, and then I saw them on fish, and I thought they were eating the fish, but they were getting a ride. I mean,
That's
that's,
small.
Depends where in their life history, but yeah.
I mean, boy, no, it looked so gross seeing the way they were
But
attached.
the other thing with alewives, and then I'll be quiet, but is that they help move mussels around. There's a mussel in the
Freshwater
Penobscot
mussels.
called the
Yes.
alewife floater, and essentially it attaches to the little spat, if that's right,
Yeah.
attaches to the gills of the alewives. The alewives go upstream, and it falls off and colonizes that habitat. So again, you need free-flowing rivers, you need open rivers for those type of relationships to establish themselves again.
Get the kids away from the parents eventually is the important part. Another cool thing about those river herring is that there are just so many of them. If you can imagine 6 million fish, if 40% of them are female, which is about the ratio, every female produces about 100,000 eggs. About 1,000 ends up making it all the way back to the ocean again. So if you look at Maine's rivers and streams, there used to be about 16 billion bite-sized, lipid, fat, protein-filled animals swimming out every year of these river mouths. So that's exactly what would attract marine fish like tuna, like whales, like seals, like halibut, like hake, and cod. And it's the ancient records, which historians have looked at, where those cod were moving. They would come into the mouths of the river and feast on these juveniles, and then follow the schools off to sea, and then they'd come in again. So they noticed this pattern of the cod stocks going in and out. So by cutting off the rivers and stopping this incredible flow of food, you were also depriving the marine environment.
And the cod, you know, people fishing for cod and making their living in the near shore.
And I thought that cod collapse was climate change driven, that they're going further out, but it's obviously
Started-
interdependent on
yeah,
other things too.
Started before a lot of the big temperature changes have started, but yeah.
Yeah, could you reflect some more about the memory of, well, shad were never here. If we don't have that memory, we don't miss them. And other ways that you've just observed, people's reluctance to change or to think about, this as a positive experience, to remove dams as a positive, not only for, all of these fish, as Chris says, he doesn't care about the fish, but I think he's coming to care about the fish. But just more reflections on human response in your experience to what you observed with the VZ Dam removal and Great Works dam removal. And in general, I guess I'm just really curious about how we help people connect more to our river, to any river. You know, I've noticed, being a New Englander all my life, that most houses are built not facing the river, along the river, but facing away. And our lack of connection as colonizers. Anything you have to share along those lines would be really interesting to me.
Well, that's probably around Maine, not just around New England, around anywhere, it's that change when you go into, and suggest something, because people grew up, seeing something the way it was, the dam was always there. So it's a valid concern, it's not something that you can just dismiss by any stretch, because they don't have that, they never saw a free-flowing river, it's like they never experienced shad or shad bro or see a shad or shad fishing. So it's a slow process to try to earn trust, to bring them to other places in the river where it is free flowing, or to see other projects that have happened, to talk to other folks, other towns along the river. But it's a very, I guess, slow, deliberate process. But it's because it's certainly a valid concern. However, one thing I can say, because we've been doing projects really since it really started with the Edwards Dam, but there were a lot of other smaller things happening also. And I'm not aware, there's been no project, and we've been involved in 40 of them, where there's people 5 years or 10 years afterwards in those communities saying, oh, I wish that hadn't happened. In most part, it's saying, oh, well, why didn't, why did we vote to keep that dam 5 times over the last 75 years? It's like, in general, it's always been positive. The changes, in looking back, and that was true with the Edwards Dam too. We had a lot of people, because that was early on, that didn't want to see that, but it seemed like all those people came around a few years afterwards, and when they saw that it wasn't a stinking mud hole, that the river was there's still a lot of water coming down the Kennebec, and some of those fears didn't come to fruition.
And we are building up that, lived experience now, as Andy says, and I think that you can really tell that. And there was just a dam that was removed at the Canadian border in Calais on the Scudic River, and most people don't even know what happened, and that's remarkable. When we think of what has happened at some other removals, it's really remarkable. And I agree with Andy. You just don't really hear. I've rarely run into anyone who, even a handful of years later, is still vehemently opposed that a dam came out. So I'm not saying that's universal, but so far it seems pretty universal, and you've seen many more, and also in terms of experience. When we lose the fish, people don't remember the fish. They also don't remember that there used to be huge congregations of eagles, for instance. And on the Kennebec, it's right now, if you go to, there's a dam on the Sebasticook River above Winslow at Benton Falls, and there's a fish lift, an elevator there, and you can see, you can walk on a little walkway and see the fish in it. You can do that at Milford also, and it's absolutely amazing how many birds there are around that dam at this time of the year, particularly eagles and osprey. And that, when the Edwards Dam was coming out, there were so few, you'd be hard pressed to see an eagle. And now it's commonplace to see eagle drama on the river. Just the other day, I live just near the Kennebec, and the other day, in a field near my house, which is maybe an eighth of a mile from the river. There were two eagles, and they were doing their mating thing with their wings out, and they were just kind of spiraling down out of the sky, almost hit the ground, and then both kind of took off. And we'll see osprey carrying fish over the house, and we find fish in the road, you know, that birds have, well, they lose them because, you know, the eagle tries to steal it from the osprey, and the fish gets dropped and they both fly off. But it's amazing. It's a much more exciting, vibrant place than it used to be, and there are a lot of components to that. So, and I know at the Penobscot Nation, you know, I mean, there's a whole different depth of history.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, we have a lot of place names, obviously, were, you know, named after certain, you know, certain activities or species. We were just talking about the other day when Laura was up. So Kabasakani is where, you know, where all the hubbub was about all the sturgeon down the Kennebec watershed
Gardner.
there. Yeah,
Gardner,
yeah, and, you know, that led me to talk to one of our cultural folks, and just to remember that, and Kabasa was the word for sturgeon in our language, and I can't remember the exact translation of what Kabasakane was.
Place of gathering.
Yeah, place of sturgeon, place where sturgeon gather,
Gather.
so it is, yeah. So then we have Madamasconis, which is an area where our fisheries program's done a lot of work, and that's place of many alewife, and so we obviously brought some alewife up there with DMR and kind of kick-started that run, and Andy and AFSF did some work with the nation in a project where we'd kind of taken out an old, I guess it was an old log drive dam, lake level kind of, you know, deal that didn't have any passage. People were going down there and, you know, messing with it, messing with the lake level and stuff. So they, you know, we did this nice, really neat engineer project where you created this, you know, basically maintained the lake level through a series of, you know, just this really nice rock bed. And, you know, we planted a bunch of native species down there, and we always kind of talk about, you know, everybody, you know, even up here, I've heard people say it, you know, they're worried about this being a mud flat out here. And it's like, we planted all those nice native species out there, and what's back there now, just, it's alders, and it's what it wants to be, because that's what's all around it, you know. That whole stretch of the stream is alders, so.
Chuck, were you part of the youth program? You're probably too old for it, the Penobscot Youth Program?
Probably, no, I'm trying to think, no.
I went out one day learning to throw a cast net for alewives, and I didn't realize that youth were taking them to the garden, the community garden,
Yeah,
and using the alewife as fertilizer. And I know at Benton Falls, they also take some of the alewives and smoke them and send them to Haiti for food relief.
Yeah.
But most of them are used for lobster bait, which is kind of important for Maine.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they have a big festival there now every year also, you know, where they're.
At World Fish Migration Day. Get the hat on again.
World Fish Migration.
Do you have a question back there? Sure.
Pete, I have an economic question for the panel. I'm gonna stand and talk a little louder because I'm hard of hearing. Using the Penobscot River Restoration Project as a base of data, and now including Piscataquis branch work that we're hoping to do you have any feeling for the cost per species restored? No matter who owns the dam or controls the dam, do you have any feeling for the money spent public, a good part of it, and money that comes in from the two big partners that we have working with us here? Do you have any idea of what the costs have been so far and the return, the results in species restored? Numbers of species or actual species restored? Like the story about nobody even knew what a shad was. So how would we know whether we wanted to bring them back or not?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. In dollars,
Mm-hmm.
millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
What is our money that's been spent producing?
But it's going down cost per fish is going down every year, so we're trending in the right direction. It's a really interesting question, and I haven't heard of it couched that way before, but, you know, we do know the cost. We know the exact cost of the Penobscot River project, and we know the cost of any of the work in the tributaries, and that's all well established. And then we also know, because of the fish counts, the fish that are coming back, and the projections, you know, we've got a pretty good idea on the available habitat and what numbers that realistically to expect. So, you know, it would be, with some back of the envelope calculations you could do, but it'd actually be sort of a nice University of Maine study or something along those lines. I mean, there's other things that go into it. For instance, angler days. You know, the angler days. You know, there's so many fishermen now fishing for shad and stripers in the lower river, and so, you know, there's a lot of variables that could go into that model.
But in about 30 years, it'll be somewhere around $1 a fish if we didn't increase the number of fish coming up the Penobscot River now. If you look at the town of Benton Falls, 10% of their annual budget comes from the sale of permits for the harvests. And for the lobstermen, it's 50% of their spring bait comes from the river for free. And they buy a harvest permit, but that's nothing compared to the value you get for that bait, which otherwise they would be getting from, and have been getting from, places like Alaska and California and even Australia. So the cost of getting bait, it would be a good student, we've had undergrads try this and it didn't work so well, but we could use a grad student with a good economic sense to figure out what are those avoided costs, what's the carbon consequences of that, and what are the implications for the Gulf of Maine when you add 10 billion juvenile fish every single year to that economy, that socio-economic ecology of the Gulf of Maine. So we don't have an answer.
Well,
Well,
But we get the fish back every year for free.
I also was hoping you might take a crack at capital costs per species restored.
Capital cost. So that's where I came up with the 30 years, bringing it down to about $1 a fish.
Dollar fish, good.
Yep.
That's what I needed to know.
And that's if it's current levels, but they're increasing geometrically right now. So that I'll come back in another 5 years. I'll give you a better cost per fish.
sir?
You guys are on this project to clean up the entire river system, right?
That's a bigger chore
Yeah,
than I
it's
think.
been it's a watershed scale restoration project that continues.
Well,
Yes.
I think of the medieval cathedrals. The people who started them are not gonna, their grandchildren would not be around to see them end. So we don't worry about our lifetime in this. How far along are you on this project that our grandchildren may finish?
Well, the removal in 2012.
No,
So,
yeah, I mean.
but we've got
fa-
about 63% of the watershed is accessible to fish right now. Which is we don't expect to get the west branch of the Penobscot in our lifetime, but maybe Chuck's kids.
Maybe.
Yeah.
60%?
But some dams are going to stay. We have too much carbon that we need to keep out of the atmosphere, burning coals, and hydro dams are going to be necessary around the world, which is why the news of this project is so important globally, is to put it into context. But we're going to need dams, and there's going to need to be fish passage, and we're terrible at it, but we're trying to get better. There's a whole conference last week in Quebec for 4 days to talk about this, and engineering students all around the world coming to figure out how to do this, because we're going to need some dams. Every dam is not great for a river, but some places may be less damaging than others. So what we're hoping is that we can bring access to the best part of the rivers for for all 12 species of fish.
Is there a master plan
There
for what
is.
you're doing?
The Department of Marine Resources has an operational plan for the Penobscot.
Yeah, there's a phased plan that's, it's probably needs updating at this point, but Penobscot's one of the few watersheds in Maine with a comprehensive fisheries restoration plan that was jointly done by the Department of Marine Resources and Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes me think about one of the points in the book about, if the Stillwater didn't provide that, go-around and allow for dams to be there, this might have been more difficult, was my takeaway. It was fortuitous that the Stillwater River acts in the way it does, so that,
For power generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no question, that's a unique attribute of the Penobscot that was helpful, but as we've seen in other rivers like the Kennebec, they all have certain things that you can use as levers.
And there are rivers around the world where they're trying to replicate that. They're calling it doing a Penobscot. It's happening in Finland, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in the Netherlands, where they are looking at multiple rivers to shift power onto so that they can free the most important accessible routes. There were two questions in the back, Laura.
Yeah,
you-
yeah, yeah, I know.
yours.
And just because she hasn't had a chance yet, yes,
Me?
yes, please.
Just a thought that there's a lot of competition for sustainable energy, but there's also a lot of concern and competition for our fish industries. You know, both the marine and the freshwater, and so it seems, as always, that education is such an essential part. And I feel that there's a more general knowledge of the value of, you know, our wetlands that are close to the sea, our saltwater wetlands. But I think this whole story of the fish coming up into the tributaries is really essential for people to understand, and I don't think it's quite as common knowledge. I think once people have these understandings, it makes life easier for progressing with these projects that are so important. And the idea that, you know, in progress, you gotta knock the dams out, you know, sometimes you gotta go backwards to go forward.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
no, that's right.
There's so many places where we've done fish passage but it's private property, it's remote, it's not easy to get people to show. I mean, I wish Blackman Stream was closer, because in Bradley you have the Maine Forest and Logging Museum, where there's this gorgeous 17 pool that was put in to sort of fit in with the period of the old logging museum. And you can go there on any day of the week right now and see tens of thousands of owlwise winding their way up around this old logging dam. And the good thing there is they get about 1,000 school kids each spring being bussed in to look at that and to learn about it. But it's just, there's not a lot of opportunities, you know, up here, although we should be giving that some more thought. But
I just wanna follow up my question with accentuating what I heard you say. We still need dams, we need hydro dams in order to survive. And it was a big part of the study that we did here on the Mayo Mill Dam. And so one of the key criteria for a dam is, can it produce something? And the second criteria is, can it meet a standard established by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission? If you don't have the need and you can't meet the standard, I'm hearing you folks say, we'd like to see the fish go up through in a natural fishway.
well, I think you know there's certain places. I mean, there's certain places in the river, as Josh alluded to, where like in the West Branch, where you have a steeper gradient, and the majority of power production of the Penobscot's in the West Branch. You know, here in the Piscataquis, which is not a big river system, back when there was a regulated utility industry here in Maine, as you'll recall, I mean, then they were getting 15, 18 cents a kilowatt hour once deregulation came. So it made a lot of dams, probably like this dam here, and certainly other ones in the watershed around the state of Maine, very profitable, or justifiable, I guess. But with deregulation, now it's a competitive market for energy prices, and so it was cut by 2/3 the price, and so that along with increasing regulatory standards for fish passage that we have nowadays, is that all those dams, all those smaller dams and tributary dams just don't make sense economically today, and they're not going to make sense 20 years, 30 years from now, because it's so crazy. But
Yeah, none of the dams that make less than something like 15, 17 megawatts are gonna be economically viable. I mean, they're just not, the dam building of the smaller dams has pretty much stopped globally.
Yeah, you're speaking to what I'm interested in. What makes a good dam? a dam you wanna keep?
Mm.
It sounds like no dams.
I have a very similar question, and you can follow up with this. You, in the negotiations for the Penobscot project, you, maybe you didn't give Milford the praise to still be a dam, but someone chose Milford to be the first dam on the river, and you increased power production, and you gave Stillwater Branch more power production. Can you speak to her question and how we came together and negotiated more power in the Penobscot and more efficient power by getting rid of a couple old dams that weren't efficient at creating power to having a few but making them better?
Yeah.
So-
I wasn't
so
part of
the-
the negotiation. I don't know if you've got.
So the approach of the Penobscot project was to look at the assets on the river, where fish pass, where power was being produced, what the interests of that particular company that we needed to negotiate with, what they were, and to, kind of ask ourselves if we could move things around on the chessboard in terms of, where are we maximizing fish, where are we maximizing power. There are a lot of factors that go into that. Including for the company, where is it most efficient for them to do that? Where are those dams at in relicensing? All these things that we don't have time to talk about in a lot of detail here, but we looked at all of those factors to decide. And the National Academy of Sciences report that Andy referred to earlier, when it recommended that there be a strategic, in order to save salmon from extinction, that there be a strategic program of dam removals. And there were a bunch of factors. How close was the dam to the ocean? The closer to the ocean, the more habitat you're blocking. How good is the fish passage? What species would have passed there? So for the Milford Dam sits on what was the first large historic falls. So so half of the fish would never have gone above that, except in, sort of extraordinary circumstances, massive flood, something like that.
Half the species.
But I'm sorry, half of the species, not number of fish.
Yeah.
So sturgeon, for instance, wouldn't have passed that spot normally. So all of those factors went into putting together a plan. And that included the company's interest in keeping the Milford Dam, because it was a center of their power production. It was a place that their operations that they worked out of. It was their national headquarters. All of these things. So it's a different formula in every place, but those kinds of factors are definitely the kind that we pay attention to.
But just one other answer for that, I think, it's in terms of a good dam, it's like at Pushaw Lake, it's 5,000 acres of sort of a shallow, warm water lake, great alewife habitat. The Pushaw stream comes in 12 miles from the Penobscot. So there, we're only trying to get alewives or river herring into into Pushaw. Of all the migratory fish, maybe eels too. So there, and we had 700 or at least 750 cottages around Pushaw that were dependent on that dam for their lake levels and dock levels and recreation. And there, dam removal would never have made sense. So we built a fishway, because again, alewives use fishways well. And we built a fishway, and there's now 1 million alewives going into Pushaw alone. So that's one where, leaving the dam, building a fishway was appropriate. And, we just opened one this week. We just built one, $2 million fishway, a huge one up in Danforth, the top of the Mattawamkeag that is going to allow fish into the Bascahegan, but you get way up there, it's just Atlantic salmon, river herring, and eels. And so we were able to build a appropriate fishway that will allow those fish to get up in there, and yet keep a lot of their traditional recreational uses up in that area.
Still costs associated with it. The long-term
Yes,
economics, you've got to
and
think
then-
of maintaining not just the dams, but the fishway also, which the dams are only built to live
Yeah.
50, 75 years at most, and then the whole reconstruction is a massive, expensive project, and the fishway needs to be redone too. Sorry.
If you don't mind, if the woman next to you could go first.
What would you say your most successful strategy was to, I'm not sure I want to use the word convince, but to change people's minds? I don't know how aware you are of what's going on here with our dam, that there are folks who are very opposed to it. So what do you think is the most successful strategy to get folks to see what you have seen and to understand what a healthy river means for our town?
I think you need to show them what success looks like, what a healthy river looks like, I think.
I mean, aside from a field trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've, I have not been involved, Miranda in my office has been involved, and, being as transparent as possible. I mean, you've done so many things right in this community. You've had the selectmen appointed a local committee that's brought in experts and taken a look at a lot of the angles. These have been open to the public. And so those are all, it's taken time, it hasn't been rushed, with trying to build trust. So many of the right steps have been taken. But this is where the change factor comes in and how difficult an obstacle that can be.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that really is a good, it's not giving you a lot of strategy, I know, for sure, but it's also encouraging people that maybe don't care one way or the other to get some more information, to actually take the time to, learn about it, and then if they care, to get out and vote.
Yeah, and I really do think that the one-on-one, the kitchen table meetings and really listening to people, it's not enough just to hear people. You've got to really consider that they might have something that you need to hear and that you'll learn from. And we do that all the time in these projects. Yeah. And I think that also helps people work through it themselves. I mean, a lot of people just have a reaction to change. I think we all, at some level, react to change. And that's just how we are as human beings. And I think that to point out the other people in the community, and not just, the local community, of course, and then the broader community, and people of different ages. I mean, kids coming up, these rivers are the same. So when the Edwards Dam came out, that's about a mile from my house. And my kids were 6 and 1. And they don't know the dammed river. Their baseline was entirely changed. And it matters. It makes a big difference to them. And my younger son lives near the Kennebec River, about 20 minutes from us downriver. And he is totally connected to the river because he watched that change. And it kind of became part of him. So, I mean, it's really powerful to share those things. And you can't, everybody loves a good field trip, right? And I think we should do as many of those as we can. But also, so for instance, the woman, Grandma's Waterfall, one of her biggest concerns was that she would not hear the river anymore. Right. And and that was enormous to her. We should put prices on things, but there's some things that you can't put a price on. You can ask yourself, is a house where you can hear a babbling river or brook worth more than one where you can't? I'll bet you it is. But even if we're not trying, right, just the personal connection to that and being able to pass. So she knew after the project that would be that thing that she cared about would be passed on even with the dam out. And it's spectacular. If you have a chance, you should stop there. If you go into the town of Vesey and just find your way to the river, the land that the powerhouse used to sit on, we tried to see if we could reuse the powerhouse in some way, but the way that it was, the building was constructed made that untenable. We actually put it out to bid, and it would have been just ridiculously expensive to do. But there is now a town park there, and that's another thing with these projects is that these are local assets, and to the extent that we can, not only do we support those assets going to the town in different ways, but also we've often helped raise money to help do that. Like in the town of Howland is a good example of that. One was to clean up the tannery, and then we had we had a pretty contentious relationship with Howland in the beginning because their dam was about to be relicensed as it was, and that was killing almost 40% of the down migrating salmon. 40%, that's a lot, and that's just the salmon.
Yeah.
So that relationship evolved over time, And I'm not saying you won't find a person in Howland who would still like to have, the turbines back in that dam. They still have the dam there. But that was a big change. And one of the changes was people above the dam who used to get flooded all the time now do not. And so when we think about the economics, we have to capture those, the avoided costs, and we have to capture all of it.
Yeah, and that's just to add on one thing to you, dose of reality also is it comes down, as much as I wish people would embrace clean water or fisheries restoration, and a lot of times people aren't ready to do that. And if we look at recent projects, Farmington, Whitefield, all not came down to economics. The vote came down to pure economics, and that was fine, because the economics are pretty clear in most of these sites. And
The cost of maintaining the dam.
the cost of the cost of repairing the dam, the cost of maintaining the dam, the cost of providing fish passage to a certain standard that's required. So it really that sort of ruled the day. We did. In the end, all these other benefits came along. People opened their eyes and have been thrilled, but it was economics.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I'm trying to picture what a dam would look like if it accommodated the fish need and the hydroelectric need. Is it really a complete good and bad? Good for fish, bad for people, vice versa, whatever? Is there a dam where we can have the coexistence of meeting the people and the fish's needs? Can we all live together, sort of thing?
Well, I think Andy described some situations where that is happening, but those aren't power generating dams, the ones that he mentioned, and they pass limited species. But I think the reality is that even though we can send a little computer to to Mars or to the moon and pick up a rock and put it in a container and bring it back and analyze it in a lab, somehow we can't figure out how to really pass fish effectively at most sites that also produce a lot of power.
And it's not just passing fish, it's also passing sediment. There should be a natural flow of sediment from the mountains to the sea. And that's not happening. The nutrients are being starved from estuaries. There's blue-green algae with these warming waters that build up behind the dams. Those are toxic, and there's all kinds of other things that are caused by dams that you have to pay for over and over and over. It's removing algae, it's getting rid of the stink, it's taking care of sickness that comes from those types of infestations. And this is a worldwide problem, which is why having great stories and imagery and having people come see this and see the hope and feel what it's like to be standing next to a flowing river, it's exhilarating. When you stand there and you see the water and you smell it, it brings a certain level of joy which is immeasurable, but I think crucially important to bring to the equation.
Yeah. And I think where in this case, the project is a watershed project, so we looked at the watershed as a whole and said, okay, the Milford Dam, okay, that's going to continue to produce power, and we're going to invest in a big fish lift there. But and that worked at that site. But we took out VZ and Great Works, because part of the problems with these dams too is that when you have impoundments, they don't act like a lake, they don't act like a river, they warm up. Fish have trouble getting through them, you get increased predation, you have the problems, Josh. And so, yes, you can deal with one of them, like we have behind Milford. But if you have one after another, then things don't work. The system collapses. So
You really do have to treat each dam.
yeah, you really need to take a look at the whole
situation
watershed and try to figure out.
needing,
Yeah.
satisfying the needs of each individual
That's
dam
right.
site.
Yes.
And places where it's less of a harm to the environment and places where it's more of a harm for environment. It's very important to weigh those out and model those.
Who is deciding that?
Case by case basis. And around the world, there's river basin management plans, which we've got a plan for the Penobscot. We have a plan for the Kennebec too. It's just not watershed wide, talking about fish passage, but
Not the government, not the Maine and federal government?
they will for an endangered species. They come up with plans for big watershed units, but They don't have the say over what happens. In China they do, but not here.
Why doesn't the state and federal government have say? Because this is our natural resources, and I just thought the government was sort of in charge of taking care of our natural resources.
There are private entities that own many of these dams, and they have to take that into account. There's only so much they can do with that value and ownership in America.
Yeah, a dam owner has to follow the law, but the laws that apply to a particular dam vary. Some are exempt from FERC regulations. There are 2 dams on the St. Croix, for instance, that are, large dams operating, and they don't even have federal licenses because they were exempted long ago, and there's a whole range of situations. So the federal fisheries agencies can put in place what are called fishway prescriptions, but they only go so far. The
And the
fishways
state of
only
Maine
work
as
so
well, right?
well. Yeah, and then the state has, very limited
Yeah.
authority. So, yeah, it may not be enough, but that is the situation.
But if you're running for president, it sounds like it'd be helpful.
No.
All right.
Right? Yeah.
The, one of the questions that's come up for us is, well, if you take this dam out, what about Sebec? And you were talking about Pushaw Lake, a lake I know. There's a dam at Sebec Lake.
Right.
Why
Yeah.
would or would not that be interesting as part of the plan?
Fish passage into it would be, fishway into it would be appropriate, but to meet our fish passage goals, I mean, if you'd see what species would use Sebec Lake, and it's only a few, like river herring and, Atlantic salmon and eels. So for those species, and, given trying to balance, you've got a lot of other recreational needs in Sebec. That's where a fishway can be an appropriate solution, a win-win. So it wins for the fisheries. You can achieve your fish passage goals and fisheries numbers, while maintaining those other uses that are important to the community.
And they need to look at the other fishery values that are there as well, the cold water sport fisheries that are in that. I think there are managers of those fisheries that want to make sure their concerns are met. So one of the things we do along the way is the science to help show how that could work and try to predict where those problems might be and where we can ameliorate those problems before they happen.
Yeah, we built more fishways than any other group in the state of Maine. So people think we're all about removing dams, and there's a lot of locations where they're just not appropriate, but there's a lot of places like these lake outlet dams, where we've been the leaders in building fishways.
Good to hear. Thank you.
And a lot of dam removals are initiated by the companies that own them, or, private entities that own them for economic reasons. And so, it doesn't all come from,
Right. All of it,
conservation
yeah.
groups
Yeah.
trying to take dams out. There are a lot of
Oh,
reasons.
yeah.
How many
Oh, yeah.
dams are left to take out then?
In the Penobscot drainage,
Yeah.
there's 120 total,
120 total.
but we've taken out 2, bypassed 1.
Yeah. Yeah, the majority of those I'm sure will always be there, but you can make by taking these ones closer to the ocean out, by being strategic, you can make a huge biological and ecological gains by, targeting the resources to those most critical dams.
And also opening up culverts that don't pass fish as well under roads. Those pipes under roads are often undersized. So when we upgrade those, we make it a safer road network, but then we also allow fish to move upstream and downstream and sediment to move. And so that's happening as well. And the Penobscot Nation has done a whole sub-watershed that's cleaned up just as of this year, the Penobscot, which is a pretty amazing achievement. So what they can access, let's make it as good as it can be.
Thank you.
There are places they won't get to, like the West Branch in our lifetimes. Well, let's focus where we can have some good impact.
Thank you.
And leave lots for you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's just important to consider too, that the reason why we're here is because this habitat is really important to salmon recovery, and, that's, we're not here just because this is, it's a target, you know what I mean? It's gonna be great, hopefully someday. But I spend quite a bit of time up here fishing. I live in Corinth. My little girl and I come up, and when they stock the trout, and it's a good little time to, get her behind the fly rod for a little while, but.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have any?
Oops, I just got my phone. Yeah, I have a question and I have a suggestion. The first, you were talking about the National Academy of Sciences having some sort of a strategic program for dam removal, is that correct?
Yeah,
This
so,
is the report for salmon recovery.
yeah, so what happened is, around, I think it was 2000, our congressional delegation, it was around time when salmon were being listed as endangered, and there was a lot of controversy. And to their credit, our delegation got some money to say, okay, is there really, first of all, are there wild salmon was one question. The answer was yes. And the second question was, can we do anything about it that will work? And the National Academy of Sciences was tasked with this. So there were experts from all around the world in different subjects, and their conclusions were, as I said, one, yes, wild fish, and the second part was, yes, with a strategic program of dam removal, we can actually, recover them. I mean, that's what the Endangered Species Act is about. You want to take species off of that list. That's the success. So, and that I don't think that there have been any more recent. These were kind of big fundamental questions that hadn't really been looked at, and I think that the reason they were looked at was actually the opposite of what happened. What was hoped, I think, was that was going to say, no, forget it, it's a waste of money, it won't work, we're all doomed, and instead it said, they're wild, we're not doomed, get to it, which we have. So.
So, curious if that strategic program was any way connected to FERC. Does FERC support that in their implementing of yay and nay, this dam really needs to go, or have they had any bias or previous information?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have cited that study, and including many specific parts of it in our efforts to open fish passage at various places. And I would say, I believe it's had an impact. And there are a lot of other studies that inspired other work that's also been very, very helpful. So.
Okay, so then my suggestion on this, I had sons, maybe some of you folks did too, that loved science, loved STEM, loved robotics. And WPI started that robotics program, the competition. So every year they have a different thing that they do. Okay, so they give them one thing, there's two parts of it, where they do the robotics over here and they create a robot for whatever it is that they're gonna compete with. Okay, it's crazy, it's fun. If you've ever been to one, it's really a blast. And then the other part is they give them a challenging, very challenging question. 1 year out of the two that my kids were doing it, there was macular degeneration. And the stuff that they came up with, they were required to study it very heavily and then come up with solutions and do a presentation about it, which was awesome. So I'm thinking that stuff like this, with the challenges with the dam, with the blue-green algae, with the sediment, with the fish, and all these different things, why don't you give it to these young minds to give it a shot and see what they could do? I bet you they would come up with some good stuff, because this stuff is national.
Yeah, international.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure about, well, by now, probably.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
The robotics is
that's a great
definitely
idea.
national.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of bright engineers in Quebec last week, all showing off their models and things. I bet some of those were robotics kids just a few years ago. Yeah,
Thank you.
super.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.